You ever have someone call 911 because you locked your own gate? That's exactly what happened to me. It started on a quiet Sunday morning, birds, breeze, peace. I was tightening the new lock on my front gate when a teenage boy stopped his bike right outside. "Hey, my mom said this road's community property. You can't block it." I looked up, confused. "This isn't a road, kid. It's my driveway." He rolled his eyes, pulled out his phone, and dialed 911 right there. "Yeah, there's a man blocking a public gate," he said confidently. "My mom's the HOA president. She said it's illegal." And that's when I realized this wasn't about a gate. It was about control and his mom. She was about to learn what happens when you push the wrong person too far, because I wasn't just any homeowner. I was a man who knew exactly how to fight back legally. By the time the police arrived, 3 neighbors were standing across the street, recording. HOA Karen, floral dress, sunglasses, hands on hips, was already lecturing the officers. "He's violating community code. That gate's supposed to stay open for safety." I stood there calm, hands in my pockets. "Safety or control, Karen?" She turned sharply. "Excuse me. This gate's been on my property since before your HOA even existed." I said, "The survey lines are public record." But she wasn't listening. She kept talking over me, louder and louder, as if volume made her right. The officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. Then her son spoke up from behind her, smirking. "Told you, Mom, he's being difficult again. Again." That word hit me like a punch. This wasn't their first stunt. Last month, they complained my grass was too green. Before that, my fence was too tall. Now, apparently, my lock was a crime. So I did what any man tired of being bullied would do. I walked up to my gate, unlocked it slowly, and then closed it again, harder this time, so the clang echoed across the street. Karen flinched, her son laughed nervously, and the officer finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, this looks like private property. We can't intervene if it's within his legal boundary." Her smile cracked. But it's our neighborhood." "Yes," the officer said flatly, "and this is his land." The air turned heavy. Neighbors whispered. Karen froze, and for once she had nothing to say. But something in her eyes said this wasn't over. She walked away that day without a word. But by evening, I saw her again standing by the sidewalk with a clipboard, phone in hand, whispering to someone. That's when I knew. She was planning something bigger. And this time, it wouldn't just be about a gate. By Monday morning, my quiet neighborhood had turned into a whisper network. It started small, one neighbor avoiding eye contact, another refusing to wave. By noon, I knew why. The HOA chat group had exploded with messages. "Did anyone see that man shouting at Karen's son? He slammed the gate on a child. We might need a safety vote next week. Lies." All of it. I scrolled in disbelief as Karen's name appeared again and again, forwarding screenshots, twisting words, feeding her favorite audience, fear. And she knew exactly what she was doing. By afternoon, an official-looking envelope sat on my porch. "Oh, a notice of violation, aggressive behavior toward community members. $500 fine." I laughed, not the happy kind, the kind that comes from disbelief. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up. "Hello, Mr. Harris." The voice was calm, too calm. "This is Barbara Whitmore, HOA president. We received complaints about your attitude toward our residents." "My attitude?" I said. "Barbara, your kid called the police because I locked my own gate." Her tone sharpened instantly. "You locked community access." "It's my driveway." Silence, then a low, smug chuckle. "Well, the board doesn't see it that way. You'll be hearing from us soon." Click. I stared at my phone for a full minute. It wasn't anger I felt. It was resolve. Because that call told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about a woman who couldn't stand being told no. That evening, I set up cameras, one by the gate, one by the porch, one hidden near the mailbox. Not for protection, for evidence. Because when someone like Karen starts losing control, she doesn't stop. She escalates. By nightfall, I saw headlights flicker across my lawn. A white SUV, her car. She slowed down just long enough to snap photos of my yard, flash still on. Then she drove off. I smiled faintly. "Got you," I whispered, watching the red taillights fade. The next morning, things got worse. A letter arrived from the county property office. Anonymous complaint, unregistered fencing modification. Karen again. She'd gone from HOA rules to county-level harassment, but this time I was ready. I drove straight to the property office, armed with blueprints, land surveys, and one thick folder labeled evidence. When I walked out, the officer on duty shook my hand. "Sir, you're perfectly within your rights. And if that woman keeps filing false claims, she'll be the one fined." I smiled. That's all I needed to hear. When I got home, I saw her again standing with two other neighbors, whispering, pointing toward my gate. I walked up calmly. "Afternoon, Karen." Her fake smile flickered. "Oh, just checking the line of sight for emergency vehicles." "Funny," I said, "because the county says I'm good. Want to see the report?" Her expression froze. The two neighbors slowly backed away, but she didn't leave. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you can outsmart me with paperwork?" I met her eyes. "No, I don't need to outsmart you. I just need to expose you." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I smiled, calm, confident. "Neither do you." She stormed off, heels clacking against the sidewalk like gunshots, and I knew I just declared war. That night, I checked my cameras at exactly 11:42 p.m. The footage showed her son sneaking onto my lawn. He tried the gate locked. Then he lifted his phone, took a photo, and ran. The next morning, another letter, violation, gate obstructing pedestrian access. Another fine. I didn't even flinch. I printed the video, stapled it to the notice, and sent it straight back to the HOA office. No words, just evidence. By evening, I got a call from the HOA vice president. "Mr. Harris, we saw the footage. We'll review your case." Translation: Karen's losing control of the board, but Karen wasn't done. The more her power slipped, the more desperate she became. And desperation has a smell, the kind that seeps into everything around it. 3 days later, I woke to the sound of voices outside my window. Karen again, this time with a clipboard and two police officers. Her son stood beside her, pointing at my camera like it was a weapon. I opened the door, phone already recording. "Morning, officers. What's the emergency?" Karen jumped in before they could answer. "He's been filming minors without consent." The taller officer turned to me. "Sir, may we ask why you have cameras pointed toward the street?" "For the same reason every homeowner does." I said, "Protection. Also, I'd like to show you something." I handed them the clip from last night, her son trespassing. The officers watched silently. Then one of them looked at Karen. "Ma'am, your son's the one on this footage." Her smile vanished. He was just checking something. "On private property," I said. At midnight, Karen's lips trembled, but she said nothing. The officer turned to me again. "Sir, looks like you're in the clear." I nodded. "I know." As they left, Karen stood frozen on the curb, face pale, eyes burning. That was the moment she realized her story was collapsing, and I was just getting started. By Friday, the neighborhood looked picture perfect again on the surface. Lawns mowed, flags fluttering, mailboxes gleaming under the morning sun. But beneath all that suburban calm, there was tension thick enough to choke on. Everywhere I went, whispers followed me like shadows. Karen had been busy spreading stories, twisting the truth, and playing the victim in her favorite role, the misunderstood hero. According to her, I wasn't just aggressive. I was dangerous, the man who intimidated the community, the man who terrorized her son. But what she didn't realize was that every rumor she spread was becoming a rope, and she was wrapping it around her own neck. That afternoon, I noticed something strange. My side gate was slightly open. I never left it that way, and near the latch, a muddy footprint. I followed the prints around the house, straight to my backyard. At first, I thought it was just more trespassing until I saw it. A broken flower pot, a knocked-over chair, spray paint across the fence, red letters, sloppy and uneven, "Get out." I froze. For a full 10 seconds, I just stared. Not at the words, but at what they meant. She wasn't trying to find me anymore. She was trying to frame me. I took photos from every angle, wide shots, close-ups, timestamps visible. Then I called the police myself. When they arrived, Karen was already there, like clockwork. She stepped out of her SUV holding that same clipboard, her sunglasses reflecting blue lights. "Oh, thank goodness you came," she said sweetly to the officers. "He's escalating." Escalating, I asked, "You mean the graffiti on my fence?" She tilted her head. "On your fence. That's community property, Mr. Harris." I laughed. "Community property doesn't come with my deed, Karen." She smiled, tight-lipped. "We'll let the police decide that." The younger officer cleared his throat. "All right, let's keep this civil. Mr. Harris, when did you discover the vandalism?" "About 10 minutes ago." I said, "Check the paint, it's still wet. I also have security footage." Karen's smile faltered. "Footage," she said carefully. "Oh yeah." I said, "That new camera facing the fence, it caught everything." I handed my phone to the officer. They watched the Clipper sun, flashlight in hand, spray can glinting in the dark. Karen's jaw dropped. "That's not what it looks like," she shouted. The older cop looked up. "Ma'am, your son is clearly on this recording." Her voice shook. He was cleaning graffiti. Someone else must have done it before." "Ma'am, he's holding the can." Silence. Only the sound of her own excuses echoing back at her. I folded my arms. "You know what's funny? That's the same color paint that was on your fence last month." Her face went pale. Then came the final blow, the officer's words. "Ma'am will need to take a statement, and your son will have to come down to the station." Karen turned to me, eyes blazing. "You did this," she hissed. "You set this up." I met her glare calmly. "No, Karen, you did this when you stepped on my property the first time." As the officers left with her, the neighborhood watched in silence, phones out, cameras recording. The same people who used to whisper now just stared. And for the first time, Karen looked small, not powerful, not in control, just small. When her car drove away, I stood alone in my yard, the red paint still dripping down my fence. It wasn't over, not even close. Because if there's one thing I've learned when a person like Karen starts losing power, they don't surrender. They scheme. That night, I was reviewing the camera feeds when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another car, not Karen's, not her son's, someone else. A tall man in a hoodie stepped out, checked his phone, and dropped a small envelope through my mail slot before driving off. I opened the door. The envelope sat there like a threat. No name, no address, just one printed label. "You've made the wrong enemies." It wasn't from Karen. It was bigger than that. Because inside was something worse, a printed notice of a lawsuit filed by the HOA itself, claiming harassment, defamation, and property damage. They were trying to bury me under paperwork one way or another. I looked out at my yard again, the red paint glowing faintly under the porch light. The fight had just gone from personal to official, and this time I wasn't backing down. The morning of the hearing felt unreal. The sun rose over the quiet cul-de-sac, casting long golden streaks across my driveway, the same driveway where this entire mess began. Birds chirped like any other morning, but to me the sound was mocking. I straightened my tie in the mirror, but my reflection didn't look back like it used to. Weeks of tension had carved fine lines across my face. Sleepless nights, endless emails, fake notices, letters on my door, all from the HOA, all because I locked my own gate. But this time, I wasn't walking into that room blind. I had evidence, I had witnesses, and most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. The community center's hearing room looked less like a courtroom and more like a stage play polished table, cheap flags, and a row of smug faces sitting behind clipboards. At the center of them all sat Karen Pearl's lipstick, and that same condescending smile she wore the first day we met. To her right was the HOA president, a man named Greg, whose handshake could make you question your worth. He gave me one of those fake professional nods. "Mr. Harris," he said, "thank you for coming. Let's resolve this matter like civilized people." I took my seat across from them. "Civilized, right," Karen began first, voice sweet like syrup dripping off poison. "Members of the board," she said, "this individual has repeatedly violated community standards, harassed my family, and created an unsafe environment. He's installed unauthorized fencing, ignored notices, and verbally abused board members." Her words rolled out rehearsed, practiced every syllable dripping with false confidence. Her son sat in the back, pale and uncomfortable, avoiding everyone's eyes. When she finished, Greg adjusted his glasses and looked at me. Mr. Harris, how do you respond? I leaned forward, my tone calm but sharp. I respond with facts. I reached into my folder and laid out printed photos, time, stamped, dated, every one crystal clear. Here's my property deed, I said, showing that the gate and fence are within my boundaries. Here's the local zoning code, and here's the police report from the night your board member's son vandalized my fence. Karen stiffened. Greg frowned, and here, I continued, sliding one more photo across the table, is the video still of that same son holding the spray can. The room went quiet. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. Greg cleared his throat. Mr. Harris, while that may be true, the HOA still reserves the right to enforce community standards. Community standards. I interrupted. Don't include trespassing, harassment, or filing false police reports. He tried to keep composure, but his eyes flicked nervously toward Karen. I pressed on. Let's be real, Greg. This isn't about community standards. This is about control. You tried to make an example out of me, and when it didn't work, you tried to destroy me. A few whispers rippled through the small audience of residents who had come to watch. Some nodded quietly. Others just stared at Karen, who was now glaring at me like she wanted to melt the chair beneath me. Greg snapped, "That's enough." But I wasn't finished. Actually, no, it's not enough. I said, raising my voice slightly, because the HOA didn't stop at fines. You filed a lawsuit. You claimed defamation, but guess what? Everything I said was true, and I can prove it. I turned to the projector screen behind me and tapped my laptop. The video played, Karen's son, the spray can, her voice in the background yelling, "Hurry up before someone sees you." Gasps filled the room. Karen shot up from her chair. "That's doctored. You manipulated that footage." Greg looked sick. "Karen, sit down." He muttered, but she wouldn't. "He's lying. You're all believing this criminal over me." The room erupted whispers, murmurs, tension thick as fog. And then, like fate itself had a sense of humor, a voice came from the back. "You want to talk about lies, Karen." It was Mrs. Langley, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. She stood slowly, holding a stack of papers. "I saw your son that night. I told you to stop. You told me to mind my business." Karen froze, the color drained from her face. "I've kept quiet for too long." Mrs. Langley continued, "This neighborhood used to be peaceful until you turned it into your own kingdom. Enough's enough." The silence that followed was deafening. Greg rubbed his temples, exhaling heavily. "Mr. Harris," he finally said, "given this new evidence, the HOA will be withdrawing its claims immediately." Karen spun toward him, eyes wide. "You can't do that. He disrespected me." Greg slammed his folder shut. "You disrespected the entire board, Karen. You involved your son in vandalism. You lied to the police." Her voice cracked. "You're taking his side." He stood up. "No, Karen, I'm taking the right side." I gathered my papers, calm and steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. As I turned to leave, I caught her son's eyes. He looked relieved, almost like he'd been waiting for this day too. But before I could reach the door, Karen spoke again, softly, bitterly. "This isn't over." I stopped, turned slightly. "It never is," I said. "Because people like you can't stand to lose." Outside, the air felt lighter. Neighbors who once avoided me now offered small smiles, hesitant nods. One man clapped me on the shoulder. "About time someone stood up to her," he said. I smiled faintly. "Yeah," I said, "but it's not just about standing up to her. It's about standing up to fear. Because fear, that's how they control you. They make you think you're powerless, that you're smaller than the system. But the truth, the moment you stop running, the bullies start crumbling." I walked back to my house, the sun breaking through the clouds. For once, the red paint on my fence didn't look like anger. It looked like victory, yet deep down I knew Karen wasn't done. She'd lost control, and people like her don't fade quietly. They come back angrier, smarter, and next time, they don't play fair. The sun hadn't even set that day when I realized something was off. The neighborhood looked peaceful, too peaceful. Children on bikes, sprinklers hissing across manicured lawns, mailboxes gleaming in the soft orange light. But there was a heaviness in the air, the kind that creeps in before a storm. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, still processing everything from the hearing, when I heard the first sound, the slow crunch of tires rolling over gravel. A black SUV unmarked. It pulled up in front of my house and idled for a moment before the windows rolled down. Two men in suits stepped out, no badges, no smiles, just cold stares. One of them held up a clipboard. "Mr. Harris, yes, you've been served." He handed me a thick envelope, turned, and left without another word. I stood there, watching the SUV vanish down the street. The moment it turned the corner, my heart sank. Karen wasn't finished. Inside the envelope, another lawsuit. This time, not from the HOA. It was from her personally. Defamation of character, emotional distress, and property damage. Property damage. I almost laughed. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized something chilling. Her complaint was detailed, lined with witness statements, photographs, and doctored videos. Videos of me yelling, trespassing, even threatening her son. All fake but edited well enough to fool anyone who didn't know the truth. Karen had gone full nuclear. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop, messages, emails. My job's HR department wanted to talk. Someone had sent them a complaint. The local community Facebook page was flooded with posts: dangerous man on Elm Drive, unstable homeowner threatening residents. My face was everywhere. The damage was spreading like fire. I slammed the laptop shut, pacing the room, rage boiling under my skin. She'd taken the fight online, and in this world, truth doesn't always matter, perception does. I grabbed my jacket and stormed outside. Karen's house sat across the cul-de-sac, her porch light glowing like an accusation. She stood there waiting, arms crossed, smile smug, as if she knew I'd come. "Feeling the heat, are we?" She called out. I stopped at the edge of her driveway. "Are you insane?" I snapped. "You just faked evidence. You're lying to everyone." She stepped closer, eyes sharp as glass. "I'm correcting a mistake," she said. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You made me look like a fool. That's not something I let slide. You can't win this." Her smirk deepened. "I don't need to win. I just need to make you lose." The porch light flickered above her, shadows slicing across her face, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. She didn't care about money. She wanted my life dismantled. The next few days were hell. A reporter showed up at my gate. Cameras flashed, neighbors whispered. Even people who once supported me started pulling away. The power of a rumor, it's deadly when it spreads fast enough. But I wasn't going to let her destroy me again. Not this time. I called my lawyer, but he sounded uneasy. "Listen," he said, "this woman's connections go deep. HOA board, local council, even the community policing committee. She's not just someone with influence, she is the influence." I clenched my jaw. "Then I'll find her weakness." He sighed. "Be careful. People like that, when cornered, they don't fight fair." One night, I was working late in my study, reviewing documents, when I heard a faint tapping sound. At first, I ignored it, but then came another, sharper this time. Glass. I stood up slowly, walked to the window. Nothing. And then the third tap. I stepped out onto the porch and froze. There, hanging from my gate, was a small plastic bag filled with something red. Paint, and taped to it a note: "You should have left when you had the chance." I looked around. The street was empty, silent except for the hum of distant crickets, but I could feel eyes on me. I took the note down, hands trembling not with fear but fury. That's when I saw the shadow move across the hedge line. Someone was there, watching. "Hey!" I yelled. "Come out." The figure bolted. I ran after them across the lawn, through the side alley. Adrenaline surged. They cut through the backyards, leaping fences like they'd done it before. I chased them until they disappeared into the dark. But just as I was about to turn back, something glinted on the ground. A phone. I picked it up. Screen cracked. Wallpaper, a photo of Karen's son. By morning, I'd already gone through the contents. What I found changed everything. Text threads, voice messages. Karen instructing her son to make it look like he's losing control. Screenshots of edited videos, fake timestamps, shared from a burner account. I had proof. My pulse raced as I scrolled. This was it, the break I needed. But before I could even back up the files, the phone buzzed. Incoming call, unknown number. I hesitated, answered. Karen's voice came through, cold, sharp, controlled. "I think you have something that belongs to me." she said. I didn't respond. Her tone dropped lower. You don't know what you're getting into, Mr. Harris. Walk away before I make you wish you had. Click. The line went dead. I stood there, the phone heavy in my hand, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was war. I went to the police that afternoon, but when I handed over the evidence, the officer barely glanced at it. He sighed, polite but detached. Sir, you're talking about private property disputes. Not much we can do unless there's a direct threat or physical harm. I stared at him. She has threatened me. Look at the note. He shrugged. Could have been anyone. We'll make a report. A report, that was it. No follow-up, no help, and I knew why. Karen's influence ran deep even here. So I did the only thing left. I called a journalist. That night, a local news van parked outside my house. The reporter, a young woman named Maya, stepped out with a calm confidence that told me she'd seen stories like this before. You sure you're ready for this? She asked. I've been ready for weeks. We sat down in my living room, the camera rolling. I told her everything, the gate, the lies, the police, the hearing, the phone. She listened, nodding, asking sharp, careful questions. And when I showed her the messages from Karen's son, she froze. Do you realize what this is? She said. This isn't just harassment. This is organized defamation. It's criminal. That's when I saw it, the moment my story stopped being personal and started becoming powerful. She smiled slightly. Let's expose her. 2 days later, the story went live. Headline, HOA power gone too far. The homeowner who fought back. It spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. People across the country started weighing in. Classic HOA abuse. She picked the wrong man. Justice needs to be served. Karen's perfect reputation shattered overnight. Sponsors pulled out. Her position on the community council suspended pending investigation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled, but deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. Because when people like Karen fall, they don't crash quietly. They drag everything down with them. The morning after the story broke, my phone didn't stop buzzing. News outlets wanted interviews. My lawyer wanted meetings. And the HOA group chat, the same one that once ignored me, was in absolute chaos. Some defended Karen. Others distanced themselves immediately. But the one message that stood out came from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "You've made a huge mistake. She won't go down without taking someone with her." No name, no reply when I texted back. That was the moment I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By noon, the entire street was different. Neighbors who used to glare at me now avoided eye contact altogether. The pristine lawns, the trimmed hedges, the suburb's perfect mask couldn't hide the tension anymore. It was in the way people whispered, the way cars slowed as they passed my house. Then came the sound I didn't expect, the sharp, echoing wail of sirens. I stepped outside just as 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of Karen's house. Cops jumped out, hands on their holsters, shouting orders. I froze. Karen's son was on the lawn yelling, frantic, waving his hands. I didn't do it. She told me to. It wasn't my idea. 2 officers grabbed him, pulling his arms behind his back as Karen came running out in her robe, screaming, "Don't touch him. He's a minor." The neighborhood came alive, phones out, neighbors recording, and I just stood there watching the perfect little empire she'd built crumble before my eyes. An officer approached me. "Mr. Harris, yes," he nodded. "We'd like you to come down to the station. We need to go over the evidence you provided. Things are developing quickly." I followed them, still half in disbelief. For weeks, I'd been painted as the villain. Now, suddenly, the world was seeing who the real monster was. At the station, I sat across from Detective Raines, a calm, middle-aged man with tired eyes and a notebook that seemed too small for the mess we were about to unravel. He flipped through photos, screenshots, texts, recordings. "This is one of the most elaborate setups I've seen in a long time," he said. "Your neighbor wasn't just harassing you. She was orchestrating a smear campaign." I leaned forward. Her son, he nodded, he confessed, said she made him plant the evidence, said she promised to clear his record from a previous vandalism case if he helped her. My chest tightened, so it was true. She'd used her own son as a pawn. Why? I asked quietly. Why go that far? Rain sighed. Control, power, people like her. They don't care who they hurt as long as they're the ones in charge. Hours passed. Statement after statement, signature after signature. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, but peace no that hadn't arrived yet. Because as I got into my car, a voice called out behind me. You think you've won? Karen stood by the parking lot entrance, hair disheveled, eyes blazing with hate. 2 officers were nearby, but she didn't care. She took a step closer. You've ruined everything, she hissed. My position, my reputation, my family. You'll pay for this, you hear me. I met her eyes steady, calm. I didn't ruin anything. I said, you did that yourself. She laughed a bitter, broken sound. You think people care about the truth. They only care about what they see, and all they've seen is you fighting, yelling, calling the police. You're still the bad guy, Harris. You'll always be the bad guy. The officers intervened, pulling her back, warning her to stop. But her words lingered, because somewhere deep inside I knew she was partly right. In a world driven by perception, even justice comes with scars. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the glow of my phone screen. The news had exploded. HOA president accused of staging harassment against homeowner. Every outlet was talking about it, and my name, the one she tried to drag through the mud, was now everywhere for a different reason. But the victory didn't feel sweet. It felt heavy, because every notification, every message of good job, or justice served, was a reminder of what I'd lost in the process: peace, privacy, and faith in the community I thought I was joining. Then came a knock on the door, slow, deliberate. I opened it cautiously and froze. It was her son. No police, no escort, just him, standing there with a paper envelope in his hand. Please, he said quietly. You have to see this. Inside the envelope were photos, ones I hadn't seen before. Karen with a man I didn't recognize, exchanging cash in what looked like a dim parking garage. Receipts, notes. A burner phone number. She was paying people, he said, to post fake reviews about you, to email your job, to make you look dangerous. I stared at him. Why are you showing me this? He looked down. Because I didn't know how far she'd go. I thought it was just some stupid neighborhood thing. I didn't know she'd destroy people. He glanced around nervously. She's losing it. She's talking to people, saying you're part of some conspiracy. I think she's planning something. Something like what? I asked, but he didn't answer. He just looked at me, guilt in his eyes, and whispered, be careful. Then he left. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind made me tense. Because if Karen was desperate, that made her dangerous, and if her son was right, she wasn't done yet. So I set up cameras around the property, checked my locks, sat by the window waiting. Hours passed. Nothing until 3:17 a.m. A light flickered in the distance. Then movement by my gate, a shadow, slender, slow, familiar. Karen. She was standing at my fence, whispering something I couldn't hear, holding what looked like a canister. Then the unmistakable click of a lighter. My heart dropped. I ran out the back door, shouting, hey, stop. She turned, startled, eyes wild, and dropped the lighter. The flame caught on dry grass. For a moment, everything moved in slow motion, fire spreading. Her face illuminated in orange light, fear finally overtaking rage. I grabbed the hose, spraying the flames before they could spread to the porch. Neighbors ran out, screaming, calling 911. When the police arrived, Karen didn't resist. She just stood there, shaking, eyes empty. Her empire, her pride gone in one night of madness. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time and whispered, I just wanted to feel in control. And then she was gone. The next morning, the smoke had cleared literally and metaphorically. Reporters stood at the edge of the street. The HOA board resigned. The community voted to dissolve the association altogether. Freedom finally, But when I looked at the charred patch of grass near the gate, I didn't feel triumph. I felt sadness, because power, when unchecked, turns even the ordinary into monsters, and in the end all Karen had left was her hate. The next morning, sunlight poured across the quiet cul-de-sac, but the peace was fake. Reporters were everywhere, cameras flashed, neighbors whispered. Karen stood on her porch, her face pale, makeup cracked under the heat. Her son hid behind her, holding his phone, trembling, the same phone that had started all this when he called 911. Across the street, the man stood calm, pressed shirt, dark sunglasses, every movement precise, like a man who knew exactly how the day would end. A black SUV pulled up, news media, another car, city officials, and then silence fell. He walked toward Karen's house. Every step echoed louder than the last. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Even the birds went quiet. Karen shouted first, her voice shaking. "You think you can humiliate me? You ruined my son's future. You think anyone's on your side now?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a single document, the property ownership papers for the entire subdivision. He unfolded them slowly, letting the crowd see the bold seal at the bottom. "You remember the auction you ignored?" he said quietly. "You remember the letter your HOA tossed in the trash? That land, all of it, belongs to me now." Gasps rippled through the street. Karen stumbled backward, her son gripping her arm. A reporter leaned forward with his mic. "Sir, are you saying the HOA no longer owns this neighborhood?" He nodded once. "Not just that," he said. "They don't exist anymore." And then he looked straight into the camera. "For years, people like her have used fake power to control good families. Today, that ends." Karen screamed, "You can't do this. You can't just erase us." He turned away, calm. "I'm not erasing you," he said. "You did that yourself." Then he walked back toward his house, the new headquarters of the neighborhood, while the cameras kept rolling, and Karen collapsed on her porch, surrounded by the chaos she had created. As the reporters swarmed her, one whispered headline echoed through the air. HOA president exposed new owner ends years of abuse. And the man behind his dark shades allowed himself one quiet smile. Because, finally, the tables hadn't just turned, they'd been flipped forever. The entire street was silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm. Police lights flickered red and blue across manicured lawns, washing over faces filled with disbelief. The HOA Karen stood in her driveway, makeup streaked, her son clutching his hoodie, eyes wide with fear. The same officers she'd called, the same ones she'd weaponized, now stood before her. But this time, she was the one being questioned. The officer's voice was firm. "Ma'am, you entered private property without consent. You instigated a false 911 report, and you tried to provoke an altercation on camera." Her lips trembled. "But I didn't mean," the officer cut her off. "You said he attacked your son, yet the footage shows otherwise. Your son jumped the fence. You ordered him to." Every neighbor who had once turned away from the chaos was now out on their lawns, recording, whispering, realizing the power dynamic they'd blindly accepted for years was gone. The black man, calm and steady, stood beside the gate she'd once tried to control. His voice was low, but it carried across the cul-de-sac. "You know, it's funny. All this time, I just wanted peace, a quiet life, my own home. But you couldn't stand that, could you? You needed control. You thought you owned me. You thought you owned everything." Karen's face twisted, anger, fear, and humiliation all tangled in one expression. "You don't understand. This is our community." He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "No, Karen, this is my land. You just forgot what respect looks like when the rules don't bend your way." The officer glanced at him. "Sir, would you like to press charges?" He hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly, then shook his head. "No, not today. She's already facing her own kind of justice. Let her see what happens when power meets truth." Karen looked around at the cameras, at the neighbors, at the son who now hid behind his hoodie, and for the first time, she had no audience left to command. The man turned toward the gate, entered his property, and locked it once again, slow, deliberate, like sealing away a chapter of his life. The metal latch clicked shut, echoing through the quiet street. As he walked toward his porch, his phone buzzed a message from his lawyer. The deed had cleared. The HOA board was officially dissolved. The land was his, legally, entirely, forever. He looked back one last time at the flashing lights fading into the distance, at the woman who'd built her kingdom on arrogance, and whispered to himself, "Freedom doesn't need permission." Then he stepped inside, closed the door, and silence returned, but this time it was peaceful. Outside, neighbors still murmured, cameras still rolled, and somewhere deep in that once feared community, a new story began. Because sometimes it doesn't take violence to win. It just takes truth and the courage to stand your ground. The next morning, the sun rose brighter than it had in months. The air was lighter, cleaner, somehow as if the neighborhood itself had taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. The man stepped out onto his porch, coffee in hand, and watched the street that had once been filled with hostility now move in quiet order. Children rode their bikes down the sidewalks again, the mailman waved from across the road, and the usual scowls from a few doors down had turned into hesitant nods. A peace he'd only imagined was finally becoming real. But that peace had come at a cost, one he could still feel in his chest. He had stood against the mob. He had endured their stares, their whispers, their false accusations, and yet he had never once raised his voice. That restraint, that calm strength, it was the very thing that made them fear him even more. As he sipped his coffee, a voice called out from the driveway. It was Officer Daniels, the same cop who had once arrived with suspicion in his eyes, now walking up with something close to respect. "Morning, sir," the officer said. "Just thought you should know the HOA board voted to suspend operations. Investigations are ongoing. Looks like Karen's facing charges for false reporting and trespassing. Her son's being counseled. Kids shaken up." The man nodded slowly. "Good. Maybe this neighborhood can finally learn what law actually means, not just rules, but fairness." Daniels shifted his weight, looking awkwardly at the ground. "You know, when I first came here, I thought you were the problem, but watching how you handled it, never losing your cool, that taught me something." The man smiled faintly. "We all learn the hard way. I just hope next time people think before they judge." The officer nodded, then turned to leave, but before he reached his car, the man called out Daniels. The officer stopped. "Tell Karen something for me," he said. "Tell her. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength, but I'm done being her lesson. She'll have to teach herself now." Daniels nodded once, then drove off, leaving behind the faint scent of exhaust and something heavier, the end of an old order. As the man stood there, a group of neighbors began to gather cautiously, almost shyly. One of them, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped forward holding a pie. "We wanted to say sorry," she said. "We should have spoken up. We let her control everything. It won't happen again." He smiled genuinely this time. "It's a new day. Let's keep it that way." The woman handed him the pie, her eyes glistening. "It's pecan, my grandmother's recipe. Welcome officially to the neighborhood." He took it, nodding in gratitude. For the first time since moving here, he felt like he actually belonged. As the group dispersed, he turned toward his gate, the same gate that had started it all. Sunlight glinted off the latch, and for a moment he saw his own reflection, calm, steady, unbroken. Then his phone buzzed again, a news alert. Viral, HOA president arrested after trespassing incident goes public. Community demands reform. He let out a slow breath. The world had seen what happened, and maybe, just maybe, that meant fewer people would have to live it. He looked around the quiet street one last time before heading back inside. The battle was over, but the story was just beginning to ripple beyond those white fences. Because sometimes a single act of courage doesn't just change a street, it changes the way people see justice. And justice had finally come home. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of amber and gold. The street that had once echoed with shouts and arguments now hummed with quiet, uneasy peace. The man, still calm, still composed, stood by the gate that had once been at the center of chaos. His fingers brushed the iron bars. They were cool, steady, familiar. It was more than just a gate now. It was a line that he had drawn, a boundary not just around his property, but around his dignity, his self-respect, his right to peace. From across the street came the faint sound of footsteps. He turned. Barbara Karen, a Whitman, stood there. Her usual power suit replaced by a simple cardigan, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. The arrogance was gone. The noise was gone. For once, she looked human. "You still live here?" she said quietly, almost as if surprised. He didn't move, always did. "You just couldn't see it." She exhaled, looking down. "I didn't come to fight, I came to apologize, my son. He's scared of police now, he can't sleep. He keeps asking if he's in trouble." He studied her for a moment, his silence heavier than any words. "You made your home a battlefield," he finally said. "And then you blamed everyone who wouldn't kneel. You wanted control. But control isn't peace, Barbara. It's fear." Her voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting our community by tearing it apart." His tone was steady, but every word landed like a hammer. "Look around you. Half the people here don't even wave to each other anymore. They hide behind rules, cameras, complaint letters. That's not community. That's prison with prettier lawns." She looked up, guilt and shame warring in her eyes. "Then what should I do?" He stepped forward, not with anger, but with finality. "Start by doing what you should have done the day I moved in. Listen." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rustling the trees. For a long time, she just stood there, eyes glistening, the weight of her own choices pressing down on her shoulders. And then, slowly, she nodded. He turned to leave, but she called out again, "Do you? Forgive me." He stopped, half turning, his face unreadable. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for," he said quietly. "It's something you earn. Every day you do better than yesterday. You earn it." Barbara lowered her head. The sound of her quiet sobs carried across the still street. He walked toward his porch, each step heavy but sure. The camera of a neighbor's phone captured it from behind. The man walking away from the chaos toward his door, toward peace. And then, in the distance, a small voice, Barbara's son, called out timidly from behind her. "Mom, is he the bad guy?" She looked down at her son, then at the man disappearing through his doorway. Her answer came out barely above a whisper. "No, sweetheart. He's the one who showed us what good looks like." The camera would linger on her face, torn between regret and realization. As the wind picked up, the American flag at the corner house fluttered softly. A dog barked. Life resumed. The man, now inside his house, looked around the quiet living room. Family photos, warmth, the faint scent of fresh coffee. He set his keys on the table and sat by the window, watching the sunset fade into twilight. The reflection in the glass showed not just a man, but a survivor of a war most people never see. The war of perception, the battle of respect. He whispered under his breath, half to himself, "They thought I didn't belong here, but maybe I was meant to show them what belonging really means." Outside, the streetlight flickered on. One house, then another, until the whole neighborhood was bathed in soft, golden light. The camera would pull back, wide, cinematic, showing the calm suburb, now peaceful again. The same street that once screamed with chaos now glowed with quiet redemption. And just before the screen faded to black, his voice echoed in the background. Steady, powerful, unbroken. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you show first, and when you do, even the loudest hate runs out of things to say. Cut to black. The sound of the gate closing echoes like a heartbeat. Text fades in. HOA Karen's son called 911 because I locked my own gate. He thought I was the threat. Turns out I was the lesson. Rain fell softly that night. The kind of rain that doesn't rage, it whispers. It seeps into every crack, every scar, washing away what once burned. The entire neighborhood was quiet now, almost too quiet. After the incident, most people had retreated into their homes, blinds half drawn, afraid to meet the gaze of the man they had so quickly judged. Inside his living room, the man sat by the window, the lamp behind him casting a warm glow over the open file on the table. A legal notice, signed earlier that afternoon. His property, his land, his rights, finally protected by law. But victory didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. A soft knock broke the silence. He turned. At his door stood Officer Daniels, the same cop who'd drawn his weapon on him just days ago. The same officer whose voice had once thundered, "Step away from the gate." But tonight, That same voice trembled as he said, "Can I come in?" The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, come in." Daniels removed his cap, rain dripping from his sleeves. "I had to see you," he began quietly. "Ever since that day, I haven't slept right. My kid saw the video online. He asked me why I pulled my gun on a man who was just standing at his own gate. He exhaled sharply, guilt etched across his face. I didn't have an answer. The man leaned back in his chair. "Maybe because you didn't see me as a homeowner, maybe you saw me as a headline waiting to happen." Daniels looked down, ashamed. "You're right, I did, and I was wrong." He placed a small envelope on the table. "What's this?" "An apology," Daniels said, his voice cracking. "Not on paper, in action. I spoke to the chief. We're revising response protocols for private property calls. If an HOA calls 911, we'll verify ownership first before we act. It's not much, but it's a start." The man looked at the envelope, then at the officer. "That's how change begins," he said softly, not with shouting, with listening. For the first time, Daniel smiled faintly. "Funny thing," he said, glancing around. "You know, the first time I came here, I thought this house looked like trouble. Now it looks like home." The man nodded slowly. "That's because you finally see the man who built it." As the officer left, the man closed the door and turned back toward his window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The reflection of the streetlight shimmered in puddles. Peace returning, piece by piece. Then came another sound, faint, hesitant. Someone approaching again. He opened the door to find Barbara's son standing there, drenched, holding a small folded note. "My mom asked me to give you this," the boy said quietly. His voice trembled with both fear and hope. The man knelt down to his level. "What's your name, kid?" "Ethan," he whispered. "Well, Ethan, thank you for being brave enough to come here tonight." He smiled faintly, taking the note. "Tell your mom I read it." The boy nodded and ran back down the path, his small sneakers splashing through puddles. The man unfolded the note. The handwriting was shaky. "I'm sorry for everything, for what I did to you, for what I taught my son by example. You didn't deserve it, Barbara." He stared at it for a long moment, the words blurring through the thin veil of tears he refused to let fall. Then he reached for a pen and wrote back beneath her message. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a choice, and tonight I choose peace." He left the note on the gatepost in the morning, where she'd surely see it. Days passed, weeks turned into quiet rhythm, the neighborhood began to shift, lawn chairs reappeared, kids played on sidewalks again. The angry whispers that once filled the air were replaced by soft greetings and tentative smiles. One afternoon, while he was fixing his mailbox, an elderly neighbor walked up. The same man who had once recorded him from his porch, ready to gather evidence. "I owe you an apology," the old man said gruffly, his voice cracking. "I didn't stand up when I should have. I just watched." The man didn't look up. "You're standing now. That's what matters." A small smile tugged at the old man's lips. "You ever think about running for HOA president?" He chuckled softly. "I already have enough chaos in my life." The two shared a quiet laugh, the kind that bridges gaps no rulebook ever could. That evening he sat on his porch, watching the sunset drape the world in gold. His gate stood open now, not in surrender, but in peace, a symbol that he wasn't shutting the world out anymore. His phone buzzed, a message notification from the City Housing Council. "We've reviewed your case and your recommendations. We'd like you to join a statewide committee to reform HOA accountability laws." He stared at the screen, then smiled. This was bigger than one gate. Bigger than one street. It was about every homeowner who'd ever been told they didn't belong. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "It started with a lock. It ends with a key." The next morning, news crews filled the street again. Cameras pointed at the house once more, but this time not for scandal, for inspiration. Reporters spoke of a man who turned confrontation into conversation. The words HOA reform bill trended across the state. Barbara was seen standing quietly among the crowd, watching from afar. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. But when their eyes met for the briefest moment, she nodded once. A silent acceptance of everything she'd learned the hard way. He returned the nod, not forgiveness, understanding. As the camera panned out, his voice narrated over the closing scene. Firm, measured, resolute. They called the cops because I locked my own gate. They saw defiance, not dignity. But sometimes the walls they try to cage you with become the mirrors that show them who they really are. He paused, looking toward the rising sun. So here's my message. To every HOA, every neighbor, every person who thinks power gives them permission, respect the gate, respect the line, because one day, the man you're judging might be the one rewriting the rules. Music swelled. Slow fade to black. Text appears, based on true events, dedicated to everyone who stood their ground when the world told them not to. Then silence, only the sound of rain fading into peace. The air was heavy. The golden light of late evening stretched across the lawns, touching the white fences and the trembling faces behind them. The whole neighborhood had gathered, phones out, whispers cutting through the tension like blades. Karen stood in the middle of it, all her voice no longer sharp, but shaking. Her perfect suburban mask cracked under the weight of what she'd done. Her son hid behind her, confused and scared. The sirens were gone now. Only silence and the low hum of truth remained. He stepped forward, calm, unshaken. The man she'd called a trespasser, the one she tried to have arrested, was now the one everyone was listening to. His voice carried no anger, just the steady rhythm of someone who'd been quiet for far too long. "Do you know why I locked that gate?" he said. Karen didn't answer. Her eyes darted to the crowd, searching for sympathy. "None came because it's mine," he continued. "This land, this house, this entire street. It all changed hands when your HOA went bankrupt." A ripple ran through the crowd, gasps, stunned murmurs. Karen's knees weakened. "That's not true. You can't." But before she could finish, he raised his phone, showing the auction documents, the official seals, the signatures. "Everything. I'm not in your HOA," he said slowly, "because the HOA is now under me." The words hung in the air like thunder that never ended. A long, trembling silence followed, the kind that makes even the wind stop. Karen's son stepped forward. "Mom, is he telling the truth?" She didn't answer. Tears blurred her eyes. Her perfect suburban empire was gone. Everything she'd built on gossip, control, and false authority shattered in seconds. The man took a deep breath and looked around at the neighbors, his tone still calm but resolute. "I didn't move here to fight. I moved here to live. But sometimes, people force you to remind them who you really are." He turned to Karen one last time. "You tried to lock me out. You called the cops. You lied. You humiliated me in front of everyone. But here's the difference between you and me, Karen." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I don't need a title to have power. I earn it." Karen's breath hitched. Her son clutched her arm. He handed her the folder, the same document she had once mocked. "You can read it yourself," he said. She opened it with shaking hands, scanning the words, until her mouth fell open. The last page, a notice of transfer. Her own HOA seal printed below his name. Her lips parted, but no words came. He leaned slightly closer and said quietly, almost kindly, "Karen, I already do." The wind stirred again. Crowd began to clap slow, then louder, neighbors cheering not in mockery but in relief. Justice had finally landed in their quiet street. Karen stumbled back, tears cutting through her makeup. For the first time, she realized she wasn't the ruler here anymore. As he walked past her, the gate swung open behind him, not with anger, but peace. The light hit his face just as the sun dipped low behind the houses, golden and victorious. He didn't look back. He didn't need to, because some victories don't need to be shouted. They're written in silence, and tonight the silence spoke louder than ever.